I'm here today with Admiral Stavridis, and thank you for being here today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Chisom.
So I'd first like to start with the story behind your name. It's very interesting. Could you go into that a bit?
It's a Greek name, but my grandparents were actually citizens of the Ottoman Empire, what is today Turkey. They lived in Western Turkey, and in 1922 there was a huge population exchange between Greece and Turkey, and so they left as refugees and came to the United States in 1922.
So as a NATO commander and a general military man, what were some of your responsibilities over the years?
Well, I think anybody in the military, first and foremost, swears an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. What that really means, Chisom, is suborning the military to civilian leadership. So the first rule, if you will, of military service is that you're in uniform, but you work for civilian masters. So throughout my career, I've tried to find that balance between civil and military interaction. Secondly, anybody in the military is an operator, has to be able to go forward in a ship, a submarine, an aircraft, in a tank, in a military way to operate that equipment and conduct military operations. Thirdly, military people are leaders. They have to be able to inspire others, to communicate well, to collaborate, to build teams. And fourth, and I think probably most importantly, we are here to defend the right to free speech, to defend the right of the United States to exist as a free nation in the world. So those are a basket of things that you do as a military leader.
So how did you apply some of the work you've done in the military to your teaching at Tufts University in the Fletcher School?
Well, I did a long career in the military, Chisom. I finished up after 35 years about 2 years ago. And I thought, what do I want to do next? Do I want to go into banking and finance? Do I want to go into defense industry? Do I want to do some combination of corporate boards? But what I really wanted to do was continue a life of service. And I felt that my military service was over, but that being a teacher, being a dean, being involved with young people, mentoring them would be a way logically to continue that life of service. So I chose to become a dean at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, a graduate school of international relations.
So you recently spoke to a group of several hundred young people. You addressed the entire Lawrenceville student body, and you gave a speech about how to be an effective leader. Could you summarize some of the points within that speech?
I can. First, I think all leaders have to be good communicators, and that means being a confident speaker, being an excellent writer, leading by example in your own life. Those are all ways we communicate the ideas of leadership. So that's kind of first and foremost is communication. Secondly is innovation. I think, Chisom, that the idea of leadership is to come up with new ideas, to inspire others, because let's face it, we live in a world that's changing constantly. So I think innovation is incredibly important. And then thirdly is collaboration. It's building teams. That's what leaders do. They create a sense of shared responsibilities and leadership, and when you put those three things together, communication, innovation, and collaboration, I think you have the root of what a good leader becomes. I want to make the point, by the way, that I think service is very important. And I don't mean military service. I mean the idea of serving others. And you can do that by being in the military, or being a policeman, or being a fireman, or being a teacher, or being a nurse, or teaching for America, or being in the Peace Corps. There are so many ways to serve. But one message I tried to convey in that speech to the 800 plus wonderful students at Lawrenceville was that they should think about this idea of service in their lives.
So to think about the idea of service, you definitely need to have a firm understanding about what's going on in your own community, in your own nation, and internationally. How could we as students, and how could people in general, elevate their consciousness about global affairs?
I think first is reading. And of course, you're doing a lot of reading at Lawrenceville because you're in school. You have a lot of assigned reading. But I think doing reading that takes you a little bit beyond the boundaries of a calculus textbook or even that history text you're reading, and finding your way to current events. So a magazine that I really recommend is called The Economist. It's published every week. It's the best single source of global affairs. It's written clearly and crisply, and it covers the world very effectively. Secondly, you've got to be out there on the social networks, absorbing the trends, understanding what's happening, not being afraid of engaging in the social media world, because an awful lot of our information comes from that today. So pick out causes, people, countries you want to follow on Twitter, for example, and use those social media to add to what you're learning from a more formal source like The Economist. Number three, I'd encourage young people as they get into university to think seriously about taking courses that enable them to understand the world better. For example, languages. I think the study of language is incredibly important. I speak French, Spanish. I'm studying Portuguese today. I was lucky to be raised in a Greek-American household. So I've always found that ability to communicate through other languages is very important. And then fourth and finally, if you're truly interested in the international world, take a look at going to university and studying international relations. It's rewarding, it connects you with the world, and you can select a part of the world that you're deeply interested in and focus on.
So you mentioned quite a bit the two ideas of security and communication, and you actually gave a very prolific TED Talk a couple years ago about this idea of smart power, like international relations and international security by means of smart power. Could you explain that idea a little bit?
I can. So let's start with hard power, which is the application of military force. That's missiles, tanks, rockets, troops, using military force to achieve political ends, hard power. Soft power, on the other hand, is using things like education, opportunity, jobs, gender equality, racial equality, using these ideals and ways that we can make people invest in societies. That's soft power. So smart power, Chisom, think of it not as an on and off switch between hard power and soft power. Think of it like a rheostat, where you turn the lights up and down. Sometimes you need hard power when you go after, for example, a regime like the Islamic State. But so often the long game in achieving positive results is using soft power. The trick is finding the balance in between hard and soft power. That's what I have called smart power.
And I pulled a quote out of that TED Talk that I thought was very notable. You said, "We will not deliver security solely from the barrel of a gun." And I was wondering how you could apply this idea of smart power in this age wrought with so many terrorist attacks, such as, there's ISIS, the recent Paris attacks, all the general human rights violations happening in Africa, all over the world.
Correct.
How can we balance this idea of smart power with security?
It's a wonderful question about a terrible challenge. And you're from Nigeria. You understand the danger, for example, of Boko Haram and what they're doing in your home nation. You should think about it like this, Chisom. You are going to have to use hard power when you go after a regime like the Islamic State, like Boko Haram, like Al-Shabaab in Eastern Africa, like Al-Qaeda, the remnants of which still exist in Afghanistan. You need hard power at the point of impact. But the long game in the Arab world, for example, in Syria, in Iraq, is building coalitions among the people, providing more education, enhancing gender rights, ensuring that there's jobs and opportunity, because the majority of people who end up in the Islamic State, in Boko Haram, in Al-Shabaab, they don't really want to be there. They want a better life with a family, with children, with a job. When those options are not available, they fall victim to the kind of proselytizing and recruiting that we see from those organizations.